conventional story about the relationship between the Supreme Court and Congress regarding statutory interpretation is that the court is Congress's faithful agent and tries to interpret statutes as Congress intended. In this model, Congress speaks first by enacting a statute. Then, if a case implicating that statute gets to the Supreme Court, the court interprets the statute. If Congress does not pass legislation clarifying the statute's meaning, the court assumes its interpretation was correct. That interpretation then gets what Justice Elena Kagan has called a superpowered form of stare decisis. As the thinking goes, if the court gets it wrong, Congress can always change the law. However, in the eyes of many scholars, this story is fiction. As I argue in my Article 1 initiative essay, there are several reasons why members of Congress may disagree with the court's interpretation, but not do anything about it. The most obvious reason is that it's hard to pass any legislation. A bill on Capitol Hill must survive several potentially fatal points in the legislative process before becoming law. And even if a bill passes one house of Congress, it faces similar obstacles in the other house, not to mention the potential threat of a presidential veto. And as Justice Antonin Scalia recognized, congressional acquiescence to a court decision can mean several things. It could mean Congress approves of the new decision. It could also mean Congress disapproves, but can't agree on how to respond, is ignorant of the decision, or indifferent to it, or is suffering from a bout of political cowardice. For these reasons, among others, the odds of a congressional response to a Supreme Court decision are low. As several scholars have observed, more often than not, the Supreme Court, not Congress, will have the final say on what a statute means. This is where I argue negative legislation can play a role. As Justice Scalia observed, a majority of Congress may disagree with the court's interpretation of a statute, but also disagree with each other on what the statute actually means. In that instance, Congress can enact a law that says the court was wrong and leave it at that. Negative legislation negates the court's interpretation and lets a future court have another shot at interpreting that statute. People communicate this way all the time. To borrow from Francis Lieber's classic soup meat allegory, imagine a housekeeper instructing a helper to fetch some soup meat from the butcher down the street. And suppose there are 3 butchers on that street. The helper goes to one butcher, buys meat, and comes back. The housekeeper says, "No, I didn't mean buy from that butcher, try again." The second time, the helper goes to the correct butcher and satisfies the housekeeper. I believe this can work with legislative meaning too. Congress can tell the judicial branch a court interpreted a statute incorrectly and needs to go back to the drawing board. But let's be clear. Negative legislation is not the most efficient method of communication, and sometimes it won't work. Multiple iterations of no, try again may be necessary. But as I argue in my essay, under the right circumstances, Congress can use negative legislation to check the court's interpretive powers. When a majority of Congress disagrees with an interpretation, but can't agree on how to fix it, members should think seriously about enacting legislation. After all, if it is the province of the judiciary to say what the law is, I submit it must surely be the province of the legislature to say what the law is not.